Thank you for this opportunity and to be able to communicate what we'd like to do. The Indian Merchants Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the IMC Chamber of Commerce and Industry, was founded in the early 1900s. It was meant to represent the interests of the Indian business and Indian entrepreneurs, and also very proud to say that Mahatma Gandhi was an honorary member of this chamber. Mahatma Gandhi ji famously said, "There's enough in the world for every man's need, not enough for every man's greed." And today when we talk about sustainability or partnering for sustainable growth, it is all about, in many ways, echoing what Gandhiji said a long time ago. So this is, as the president of the IMC, I'd like to bring to bear some of our work on sustainability and try to see how we can help the chamber, its members and its partner members. We have directly and indirectly a few 100,000 members which are part of IMC. So if I were to look at just simply the world of fossil fuels or fossil resources and look upon the world of renewable resources, for example, what's the difference? So for the last, I would say, since especially the Second World War or maybe a little before that, the world awoke to fossil resources. Now, of course, before that also, it awoke to, I would say, oil. Before oil, it was and still is dependent on coal. So if you look at it, coal, or you had oil, and then you have gas. So these are the three. And if you go before that, you would have wood. I'd just like to explain. But now we try and see ourselves that the way we are consuming fossil resources, the kind of carbon being emitted into the atmosphere, the global warming that is going associated with it, it is not possible to sustain. And we can see that manifestations around us. So what is the way to do it? So if you look at oil, it comes from certain countries in the world, and India clearly today gets 85% of its resources from fossil resources. To articulate a goal that we are going to, India is rich in biomass, India is rich in the sunshine, and India is rich in soil. And if we use water judiciously, then you can actually, instead of fossil carbon, you can use renewable carbon. You can use what they call biogenic carbon, atmospheric carbon. Again, if you look at examples of fuels, you see a huge initiative by the Prime Minister trying to push for 20% blending of biofuels in ethanol, in gasoline. And again, so that becomes a very large push to substitute our reliance on fossil fuels or supplement with that on renewables. Now that has, I would say, various benefits. It mitigates climate change. It makes sure that the resources that the consumer puts, instead of going into an oil-rich country, it supplements that by giving it to our own farmers, because India is particularly an agrarian economy with still half the population dependent on agriculture. So you get a lot of those resources going there, and it contributes to energy security of the nation itself. So if you look at it, combats climate change, agrarian economy helping the farmer, energy security, all of that in a sense goes together. Indore is segregating garbage or waste into 6 different piles, whether it's a rich man's home or a poor man's home. All of it is done. The gas thus generated is used to power its buses, and all those buses, if you look at the overall financial benefit, it's net positive for Indore. So I think these are interesting ways in which you can start looking at gas. The Satat program, again, which the government of India has announced, looks to utilize the vast quantities of, I would say, municipal solid waste, or it could be biomass, it could be agri waste, and again try to create a whole gas economy which is from what they call CBG, compressed biogas. Again, you look at celluloses as a resource we have, and again you can convert that into lots of fuels. There's a whole push on green hydrogen, which will then support electricity. You have the EVs, you have flex cars which are there. In the future you might have a flex car with an EV. So you're looking at a far more sustainable world. You can look at if recently the G20 was here, when the G20, the energy transition team was there, you're also looking at opportunities of torrefaction of biomass, which means you make it so dense that it can become a coal replacement. And so these are various technologies in which what we call kick the oil habit. And so this is one way of trying to look at how do you convert agriculture into a resource. Often in the West you look at a food fuel debate. I think in India we have to look at a food and fuel story, not a food versus fuel story. Farmers, if you have a food and fuel story, earlier you are exposed to only one market. So if you have volatility in one market, an increase or decrease in that can destroy a particular farmer's income for the year. Today you might have it working as a sink, which means energy is a big sink. It will not go away so fast. So you can have something that makes sure that the price of the fundamental feedstock remains strong. So when you look at the UN sustainable goals, the SDGs that you have, and when you look at avoiding or lower inequalities and avoiding hunger, you have to make sure in our country, where the small farmer is the largest producer of food, making sure that his or her livelihood is protected will ensure more stable food supply, not only for his or her family, but also for the rest of the country. I think what we have to do is we have to look at it in a wider context. Is it truly, what is that cost for transition? There is no doubt that there is cost. So, you have to look at it from an energy standpoint, you have to look at it from a materials standpoint, both. If I look at it from an energy standpoint, it's easy to continue life as usual if I look at it in the short term. Longer term, is that life as usual going to be, what is the window I look at the next 3 months? Do I look at, if I look at the next 3 months, you might have a war in Europe that suddenly spikes your energy cost. So you want to look at a new normal, and in your new normal, you might want to say that, okay, I am going to transition into a more sustainable way of doing things. Now, what is that way of doing things? So let's say in some companies or in some parts of the world, there is a strong focus on moving into, as I said, can you move into biomass based boilers? Can you look at increased renewable electricity? You look at the price of solar power that was there 10 years ago, and look at the price of solar power today. So if you had taken the immediate view when you look at solar power 10-15 years ago, and you looked at price of 10 rupees plus per unit, you would have said, I'm never going to do solar power. And then if you look at today's price of solar power, you suddenly find it competing. So my point of view is that you need to take time horizons. You need to work on your immediate future, and you also need to look at the medium term, and you need to look at the longer term. So you need to stretch your visions out. So like one thing we're doing in IMC, we've created a special sustainability committee. I've got, we've got Chaitanya Kalia, who's the E&Y head of the climate practice. He's going to head the sustainability committee. Now, now let's go to a particular industry body, such as us, and we go to some constituent location of our members. Now, the first question that we'll ask our SME friends, or even non-SME friends, even medium size, do we know what our carbon footprint is? Are we aware that this is the world that is happening around us? Are we aware that the European Union is going to impose a particular kind of carbon tax for imports into the country in a few years later? Are we exposed to that business? Do we know that the government of India has made certain climate commitments to the world? If we are supposed to be competitive in our markets in Europe, or if we are going to be in line with commitments that our country is making, clearly first what we need to know is what are our current carbon footprints. In the sustainability committee, that's what we want to do. That one aspect will be to guide you that these are the pathways to net zero. Or to at least, if I'm running a company, this is the way you can reduce your carbon footprint or your environmental footprint. Many of us may not be aware. It may be even cheaper. It may be more expensive. It may be cheaper. And it's a combination of carrot and stick which the government of the world can do in terms of if you move to there could be a carbon trading platform that the government may create. It could be earlier, if you look at the there was the UNFCCC scheme for carbon trade into the European Union. There could be other there could be voluntary credit schemes, there could be regulatory credit schemes that could be done. So these are ways in which to incentivize people to improve from a particular benchmark that they're at. But once if the IMC organizes programs with its members to make them aware of what the context is, to make them to help them know how they can measure their own footprints, to educate them on what are the pathways to reducing their footprint. Then if you do that and show what are the incentives, you may be able to do a few members this year, but hopefully in second year and third year you'll get to a tipping point. I've often quoted a shlok in Sanskrit. There was this Samudra Vasane Devi Parvatastan Mandale Vishnu Patni Namastubhyam Padas Parsham Kshamaswame. I love that last line, Padas Parsham Kshamaswame, that I'm stepping on you and forgive me, Kshamaswame, Padas Parsha Kshamaswame. So, forgive me for stepping on you. So, if I take that, I would like to think that I am actually asking Devi, in this case, to forgive me for that footprint I have on you. So true forgiveness could also mean how do you atone for what I think I'm doing wrong, and that is to go towards a lighter footprint as I go forward. In my opinion, we do not have to compromise. We need to continue with our emphasis that India is at a different point on its growth trajectory. The per capita energy consumption in India is, maybe 5,000 units per capita per year. You have something like Norway, which is 100,000 units of power consumption per year. So clearly, if a country has to develop, it needs, energy is a kind of yardstick to understand energy consumption of where the country is. So that's no doubt that's going to happen. But given where we are and where we need to be, we can probably start thinking of things right now as we build, and we could create local energy self-contained systems which are working to generate renewable resources for needs of the food. Even let's just take regenerative agriculture. Now regenerative agriculture isn't very, so if you look at it, we take a particular worldview which is driven by corporate agriculture coming out of Europe and the US. And how is that driven? Large scale urea, large scale use of pesticides, large scale use of fertilizers there to drive this particular economy. And it has served a great purpose. It has created huge lot of food. So from a world of famines, it has gone to surplus food for the world. I'm not getting into how it is distributed, but at least we have more food than the world needs. A small farm in India generates biomass for green mulching. Many of these farms have one or two cows attached, or goats. They are the panchagavya which comes out of a farm, of a cow, which would be ghee, doodh, dahi, dung and urine. All have very different uses. And panchagavya, jivamrut, these are traditional Indian but very good farmers. If we have, I think much research is being done on using some of these traditional techniques, which is today called regenerative agriculture or agroecology, coupled with modern technologies such as drip, such as using IoT, and seeing whether we can once again put a lighter footprint on what we are doing. So you might come up with what we'll call mini fertilizer units in each farm. So the first thing is we want to partner with everybody for what, as we said, sustainable growth. The previous president had said partnering for growth. I think it's very good. I want to build on what he did, what Anand Singhania did. I want to do it I've added a sustainable growth to it. And partnering with whom? So partnering first with our members, partnering with our city that we are in, partnering with the state we are in, partnering with the India that we are in, partnering with the world. One of the ways, as I said, is we are going to create a sustainability committee. Sustainability committee would make our members aware, make them measure, make them understand, make them implement, and where necessary, make them advocate for change. Because unless you know, what are you going to advocate for? And even the idea is if we can start If you start big, great. If you start small, this should continue. I hope my successor, and he will, Sanjay Mariwala is my vice president, to take this forward as we go. I think there is an imperative to do so. There are some funds which only want to invest in climate specific or climate positive projects. How do we make people aware of what this is? Do we work with the government for when they're trying to do initiatives in green hydrogen, or if they're coming up with carbon trading mechanisms? Do we make our trading group understand what's happening in terms of Europe, and what are the ways of, what are the challenges that will come as different countries create new regulations to help push things, to move towards a more climate friendly world? How do we work with the digitization that's happening, because digitization enables us to know what's going on. So these are things that we will explore with our various members, our committees, and at least get the ball rolling and get it moving and get it bigger.